So from there, we then needed to kind of sum things up. And so this was not our original structure. We were going to put Kurt Wise later, but we decided it really needed to be a good fit to put Kurt as kind of a sum up and to give people really a historical structure. Now Kurt, this is like basically having a Major League Baseball player pitch in the minors. I mean, we gave him just a very simple thing to do, and as we kind of teased people at the beginning, he talked about a lot of other things. But we knew that he would be the best person to take the entire history of the world and put it in 8 minutes or whatever we did. And I know you had a great time with Kurt. I mean, that was...
I did. I enjoyed the time with him immensely. I mean, he's more than Major League. Whatever the league is above Major League, that was Kurt Wise, and I just loved the time being with him. But the thing he did, and I think he did in the film in an amazing way, was to help us see that the epochs that we have gone through are not minor. That's why they're called different epochs.
Right.
And you can't really understand where we are today and to view the world around us without recognizing and understanding what it used to be. And what it used to be was not what it was before that. But that's what the Scripture does for us. And God has graciously given us the context for where we are in the story today. For example, the evil that we see in the world today was not how God made it. He made a world that was not filled with death and decay and evil, contrary to those, to hold to an atheistic perspective of history. God did not make it that way. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that time, talking about those various epochs. And in particular, the thing that struck me was when he was talking about how much the earth had to recover after the flood. I'd never thought of that before, but it made sense, of course, when God had destroyed the world with these catastrophic events, that it was so deep and so horrific, and there was so much that happened to the earth at that time, that there was indeed this period of, it was almost like a curve that comes down as the earth is recovering from that. I'd never thought about that.
No, I think it's interesting, and that actually brings up an area that is a contentious, I should say contentious, it's just been lack of work done in the creation world, and that's really examining the Tertiary and Quaternary. And if you look at the way that that Phanerozoic, all those fossil layers are laid out, and we get into that in the next section, and I wish I could have talked about this, but it's just, we've never been able to do it, that you've got these, and the names come, obviously from an evolutionary view, but if you just realize in the Paleozoic, they call them old animals, but the Paleozoic is down here and they're very marine, and it kind of runs up from the Cambrian all the way to the Permian. And then you suddenly have the Mesozoic, and that's where your dinosaurs all are. And the Mesozoic runs, at your classic Triassic, Jurrasic, Cretaceous. And then you've got that very, very clear unconformity. It's very much of a break. And then you have the Cenozoic, the new animals, as they like to call them in evolutionary view, starting at 65 million years and moving forward. And this is where all of a sudden you see your mammals, and they just appear. It's very curious. But the point is that the humans are all at top in the Quaternary. That's where you find fossils, and people, this area of the Tertiary to the Quaternary, the creationists have just not done nearly as much work in. And sorting this together, and there's some real challenges here, because there's a limited time frame for getting around this of the world. And a lot of people say, well, that's a crazy idea you creationists have. And I don't think so. I think a lot of it's just figuring out how that could work itself out, that we already know just whether it's introduction of rabbits to Australia or introduction of some creature somewhere, how fast things move and can diversify and change. Right. And so I think that a lot of this, that's a great example of things still not figured out, is that world of the Tertiary, and where does the flood, post-flood boundary fall, or the multiple areas it falls, depending on where you are in the world. Right. I just think that there are a lot of challenges that still need to be there, and Kurt has brought these up that we'll bring them back up, I think, as we talk, but I think that Kurt's contribution was giving us that structure and saying that you can't always look back. I think it's a key deal to say, if the laws have possibly been adjusted here from the fall forward, what does that mean? Right. Were there things that happened post-flood, things that happened during the flood that we don't understand from a physical perspective? Possibly so. Yeah. And being willing to accept that and be able to say, you know what, the Bible presents events that are maybe not the same as the past, and it's an embracing of catastrophism that potentially embraces the laws of the natural world, which again, a lot of people are like, oh, that's a crazy idea, and yet the history of science shows that there are many things that change in our views, even of the laws themselves that are supposedly, you know, sacrosanct.
And our perspective too, as well. And that was another thing that I think Kurt was helping us do when he talked about the floating forests.
Yes.
That is totally foreign to our paradigm today. We don't think about trees floating. And yet he showed us, remember that fossilized hole. It's in the film, but we never got a chance to tell people what it was. But Kurt's theory is that there were these very huge forests that were floating. And of course, there's a lot of reasons why you need forest trees and all that they do in terms of the planet and the ecosystem and so forth. But the evidence he's pointing at is that we think that there were hollow trees. And,
that's right, the lycopods.
And here's the evidence for that. Well, all of a sudden brings us to this perspective to say, wait a second, there was really a different world here. And it's totally outside of my paradigm. And it helps me recognize, again, how weak we are when we begin to think that everything in the past is related to the present and the present processes and things that I see today. Well, there are very clear marks between those epochs and those worlds.
No, I think so, and that's even a good example because that floating forest is a controversial view inside creation. Some creationists like it, some people say, no, it can't have worked. What's interesting is Kurt built that view off of a view of actually someone else that actually had the floating forest. Kurt was taking the paleontological data of the progression of plants and animals found in the fossil record and how that would work through a global flood. It's a fascinating model that synthesizes paleontological data, both flora and fauna, with some of the geological data. And it may or may not be accurate, ultimately, only time will tell, but it's a fairly compelling model, but it shows you how creationists are taking the data, taking ideas and saying, well, maybe this is plausible in a way that's quite new and interesting, and I think very full of creativity. And I think that's the important thing, is they're working with the data that they see around them.